Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Good evening and welcome. It's very nice to see everyone here this evening. Friends, colleagues, students, visitors, good evening and welcome to this special lecture by Dr. Patricia Galloway, the CEO and President of Pegasus Global Holdings. My name is Tom Cavan. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning here at the University of Melbourne, and it's my personal pleasure to welcome you this evening. I commence the proceedings, as we do traditionally here on the campus, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which this event is taking place, the land of the Wurundjeri, and pay respect to their elders and families, past and present. This is the first lecture of the 2014 Melbourne School of Design Dean's Lecture Series, and it's a pleasure to launch this series on a topic which is of such global and local significance. Megaprojects are increasingly of interest across the world, and in particular in regions where major urbanization is underway. Projects of these kind bring with them distinctive risks of many kinds that need to be contextualized and addressed with particular attention. So tonight, Dr. Galloway will investigate how the origins of the megaproject and how it's evolved in recent years. She'll also review the anticipated rise of megaprojects and gigaprojects across Africa, India, China, and contextualizing the projects into our region and her experience. Dr. Galloway has vast experience as an advisor to the energy and infrastructure industries on megaprojects, having worked in 60 countries on some of the world's largest projects, and has strong connections even to this country. In Australia alone, Dr. Galloway has been involved in a number of projects, including the City Link here in Melbourne, the Murrin Anaconda Cobalt Nickel Mine, the Altona Refinery expansion, and the Regional Fast Rail project in Victoria. A mediator and international arbiter, she is a prolific author and is invited to speak frequently around the world. And we're very, very pleased that this evening she gave up a very privileged opportunity in the United States to come all the way to Melbourne. And she has published 2 books in particular, which are here: Managing Gigaprojects, Advice from Those Who've Been There and Done That, which was published in 2013, and her other book, The 21st Engineer, 21st Century Engineer, forgive me, a proposal for engineering education reform. This is a topic which is very close to our hearts. Dr. Galloway has made a remarkable mark on her industry and contributes to her community professionally and nationally. In 2004, she became the first woman appointed as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, an exceptional accomplishment, as no woman had been appointed to that role for 152 years, if you can believe it. Appalling. Dr. Galloway has served on the US National Science Board from 2006 to 2012, and she currently sits on several not-for-profit boards and for-profit boards, including the Pacific Science Center Board in Seattle, Washington. So we're very pleased that she's made time to travel this very long way. She's given up some remarkable opportunities to be here this evening with us here in Melbourne, and to spend time in particular with our students and my colleagues and researchers and with the industry here in the city. We are particularly interested in the alignment of the demand for understanding of megaprojects and the education we can provide to prepare future professionals for those challenges. So to this end, we're keeping you extremely busy, visiting with students, meeting colleagues in the city, and meeting researchers across our campus. So please welcome me in joining Dr. Patricia Galloway.
Thanks, Tom. Can you all hear me okay? Oh, terrific, great. I want to just welcome you for coming here, and I want to just tell you what an honor it is for me to have been invited by the University of Melbourne to speak here tonight on the unique aspects of managing megaprojects in Asia. I was chief executive of a company here in Melbourne and worked in Australia from probably the early 1900s through till 7 years ago. 1900s. Oh gosh, that's a really long time, isn't it? Yes, I wanted to have a little humor there to break up my speech. From about the late 1980s until the early 1990. I got that right this time. And I haven't been here in 7 years. And so I must tell you that Melbourne has changed dramatically. You're building your own infrastructure that looks remarkable. Federation Square, which was quite the controversial project when I was here before, is now blossoming and doing wonderful, and it's great to see that. And so it's just a real pleasure and an honor, and I thank you for inviting me here tonight. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight are going to be taken from the book that you saw, that Tom proudly shared, on managing gigaprojects, from those who have been there, done that. Considers about 24 authors from around the world that have worked on some of the largest projects in the world, and I'm very proud to be one of the authors and one of the editors. And the other two editors were was Dr. Chris Nielsen, who actually is my late husband, who probably was one of the greatest minds in megaproject construction and risk management that I have ever known in the world, and probably I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for his teachings that he mentored me in. And my business partner, Jack Dignam, is the other editor of that book, and I think that it is not a theoretical book. It comes from the heart of those who truly had to manage some of the largest and most complex projects in the world and what they truly experienced, and to give advice to others who are going to be in those roles and positions of doing that. So that's where I hope to give you some of my tidbits tonight on managing gigaprojects in Asia. So in the book, I define gigaprojects as those projects costing more than $1 billion that attract a high level of public attention and political interest because of the direct or indirect impacts on the community, the environment, and companies that undertake such projects. In addition, megaprojects and gigaprojects, those that cost over $10 billion, typically have other attributes available to them, such as extended construction periods lasting over many, many years, multiple equipment and material suppliers, specialty trade contractors, project stakeholders and investors, and may have even multinational party stakeholder involvement. And so while megaprojects and gigaprojects are increasing in number around the world, Asia is booming with them and is home to some of the world's largest projects. Asia has actually made amazing economic development in the last 20 years of the 20th century, and the area continues to develop in the 21st century. Asia was the most active area in the world in the mid-2000s, despite the global turndown in the economy. And the Asia-Pacific region remains one of the world's largest economy markets, with annual growth expected to exceed an average 7.3% until 2020, and boasts the fastest rate forecast for any region in the world. Construction activity is boosted by the international investment in infrastructure, with a growth expected to reach 135% in the next decade. So needless to say, without development of infrastructure, a country cannot be developed. And I'd like to use Japan as an example. Japan was the first in Asia to show how rapidly a nation can rise from a least developed country, as it was in the 1950s based on the GDP per capita in the world, to remarkable progress that it made in the 1960s through the 1980s. During that time, Japan not only built some of the world's largest projects in the world, it developed some of the cutting-edge technology that has been used in construction today and transferred to other Asian countries that has made construction much more efficient and economical in the way that we now construct our projects. In addition to Japan, though, we have seen another emerging country in Asia, and that being China. China has now become the leader of major infrastructure projects, not only in Asia, but in the world. Furthermore, the projects that are underway are some of the largest and some of the most controversial in the world, and raise very interesting issues as to some of the complexities in managing them. So one of the most controversial projects I'm sure that everyone is familiar with that recently was completed is Three Gorges Dam project, which was China's largest project since the Great Wall. The dam stretches nearly 0.8 kilometers high, spans 2.4 kilometers wide, and creates a reservoir big enough to bring massive cargo ships about 2,400 kilometers inland. It took a team of 20,000 workers in round-the-clock shifts, relocated 1.5 million people, and leveled more than 100 towns to build the dam. So I want to talk about that because I'm sure that many of you remember how controversial the Three Gorges Dam project was when it was being constructed. The Western world criticized China dramatically, indicating that it had dramatic environmental impacts, it was destroying major antiquities, it had social injustice, and the project should not go forward. And this is one of the aspects that I'm going to talk about tonight, because the political and social management systems and the cultural differences is one of the unique aspects that makes managing projects in Asia a very unique aspect and needs to be well understood. I was the co-chair with the CEO of the Three Gorges Dam Commission on a conference for the Society of Social Management Systems that I actually was the president of for many years. And we had the conference at the Three Gorges Dam site. I had the opportunity to spend 3 days with the CEO, and I will tell you that I walked away with a completely different insight and outlook on that project and what it meant relative to, quote, alleged environmental impact, relocation of social injustice, and covering up of antiquities. So let me tell you what he said and give you a different perspective and to give you the insights of why cultural differences are so important in how we look at planning and managing megaprojects. He said, Pat, let's think about it. You from the Western world, the majority of all of us have electricity, and we take that for granted. When we tip on that light switch every day, we expect those lights to come on. When we cool our house, we heat our house in the winter, we expect that electricity to work. A huge region in China had no electricity. And in the improvement of quality of life, and I'm a civil engineer, and many of you may be engineers in the audience, but we are taught that engineers build the quality of life. And that engineers specifically want to try to protect the public health, safety, and welfare and how we improve that quality of life. He said our goal was to do several things. One, to improve the quality of life for our citizens so that they could enjoy the things that you take for granted. Two, we absolutely wanted to have a way to provide that energy and electricity in a clean, sustainable way. We could have chosen coal. We could have built massive coal plants and really destroyed the atmosphere, but we chose not to do that. We chose to think about how we could use our natural resources for clean energy. We also were very aware of the environmental impact, and we did a huge mapping of the antiquities before we ever started that project. And we took those antiquities that we felt were historically significant, and we moved them to museums where people could actually see them, experience them, and actually understand what the Chinese culture had to offer. He goes, it's a very long way to the Three Gorges Dam. I doubt actually if most people would have driven there to see them otherwise. Did we have to cover some? Absolutely. And that is the balance that all of us as professionals, whether we're architects or engineers, have to balance. What do we do to deliver a quality of life or improve our quality of life to what we have to trade off to make that happen in our environmental systems? There's not an easy answer, and there's no right or wrong. It is a balancing decision act that we all have to think about. Relative to the social injustice, those 1.5 million people that were relocated, and I had the opportunity to talk to several families who had been relocated. They were given new homes. They were put in areas where they could still do what they had done before and given opportunities. And when I spoke with them, they indicated, I would have never had an opportunity like this to be able to house my family and to still continue doing what I do. And so for us to put our cultural perspective and judgment on another cultural perspective of what they did creates the misunderstanding, potential misunderstanding, and makes managing projects in Asia very unique when you have to have thousands of years of culture that the Asians have lived with other cultural understandings of how you work together. So it's sort of what I want to talk about tonight. And so China continues to build some of the most controversial mega and giga projects in the world. There's an organization called RepRisk, which published a report in August of 2013 of the top 10 most controversial projects in the world. The RepRisk Index is an indicator of potential reputational, financial, and compliance risk. And several of the projects have only recently started attracting criticism in the public sphere due to either a specific incident or because of the rise in the community interest. But of those 10 projects, half of them are in Asia. 2 are located in China, including China's, and excuse me if I have Chinese pronunciation incorrect, because I know there are several people from China here, so I'll give you my personal apologies beforehand on my pronunciation. China's Guyana polymetallic mine and China's Foxconn Xinhao Technology Park. China's Foxconn Xinhao Technology Park, which is a major factory for Apple and Sony projects, has faced issues with employees' health and safety concerns with, quote, reported suicides. The Guyana polymetallic mine is located in Tibet and began construction in 2008. In 2010, there was a heavy avalanche of rock and mud triggered by mining activity on the project that buried 83 workers, killing 66 of them. These issues stem around the cultural perspectives and the social management systems that make managing projects in Asia unique, and which I will continue to talk about a little bit more in detail. So controversial projects will continue in Asia as we move through the 21st century, and a lot of these are going to be centered on water. Asia is the world's driest continent in terms of per capita freshwater availability, and thus a rules, needs-based system to manage water stress, to maintain rapid economic growth, and ensure environmental sustainability is very important. But remember, China is also the geographic hub of Asia, sharing land and sea frontiers with 20 countries. So in absence of China's participation, it's going to be impossible to establish a rules-based regional order. China has established a hydro supremacy unparalleled on any continent by annexing the starting places of major international rivers and working to re-engineer cross-border flows through dams, reservoirs, barrages, irrigation networks, and other structures. China's dams serve many purposes, from generating electric power to meeting manufacturing and mining and irrigation and municipal supply water needs. China is the leader in the most mega dams in the world and is the biggest global producer of hydropower with an installed generating capacity of 230 gigawatts. China's State Council has now identified 54 new dams to the ones already under construction. But China's not stopping with mega dams. China is constructing China's largest skyscraper and will be the world's second tallest building in the world when it is completed this year at 128 stories at $2.2 billion. The $2.2 billion Gingshan nuclear power plant phase 2 will add to the Qingshan plans and will have the most nuclear reactors of any site in the world. China is also constructing one of the world's largest and busiest airports in the world, the new Beijing International Airport, scheduled for completion in 2017. And not only will the Beijing International Airport be the world's largest, the terminal at $3.5 billion is the single largest construction project in China and the third largest building in the world. A planned city, which will be completed in 2020, will cost $4.5 billion and will house about 1 million people. A $6.3 billion Jingzhaba hydropower project complete in 2015 will generate 31 billion kilowatts annually. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau project at $10.7 billion will connect 2 regions when completed in 2016. You'll see I'm increasing in numbers, and I'm going to continue to increase. The 18.2 billion Jingwan wind farm will be the largest wind farm base in the world when commissioned this year. At 45 billion, Ningzhao's Ningdong Energy and Chemical Industrial Base will double the province's GDP and generate 30.3 billion after its planned 2020 completion. At 62 billion, the South to North Diversion Water Project is expected to divert 44.8 billion cubic meters of water to the north by 2050. And in the conceptual phase, we have the Turn of the Pearl Delta into One project, an urban megacity larger than Wales at a cost of $306.7 billion. Now, that's a lot of gigaprojects. However, China is not the only Asian country with controversial projects and megaprojects. We have other controversial projects in Asia, including Indonesia's Big Gossan Dam, Korea's Four River Refurbishment Project, and the cleanup project surrounding the Japanese Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. And what makes these projects controversial? Well, let's talk about those. The Big Gossan Dam, mine suffered a fatal collapse in May of last year in which 28 people died and the Indonesian government suspended production pending an investigation. The $19.8 billion Four Rivers Refurbishment Project in South Korea was the subject of environmental concerns and corruptions with allegations of bid rigging and government bribes, and the environmentalists have claimed that beams that were erected interrupted the river flow and had extensive damage to the local ecosystems. And moving to Japan, no one needs to be reminded of the situation in Fukushima. The latest reports indicate that it will cost Japanese yen 100 billion of the Japanese yen 1.3 trillion in cost incurred since the disaster, and may take up to 4 decades to complete the decontamination efforts. But that doesn't still compensate for the lives that were lost, heavily contaminated with radiation, and the food source, both on land and the sea, which were impacted. And so we actually were retained to advise the Japanese contractors shortly after Fukushima happened to determine what they might consider in assistance to TEPCO, the utility that was in charge of the Fukushima plant, advising them as to potential risks, areas, and what could come out of this project. But while we were there, we learned a lot of things. There's a lot of lessons learned to be learned from the Fukushima incident. And a lot of those involve around risk identification and the understanding and the importance of understanding risks when you're going to go into megaprojects relative to not only identifying them, the probability of occurrence of risks, and the consequence if they happen. Now, one thing I want to put in perspective, I do a lot of work on nuclear power in the world. It's a very clean and today very safe source of energy. And when things happen on Fukushima, it causes people to go, oh my God, the sky is falling. But I want to put into perspective really quick that the Fukushima plant is a Mark I technology, one of the earliest designs of a containment in a nuclear power plant. Those types don't get built anymore. They're not built anymore because the new designs have learned from lessons learned of very nuclear accidents that have happened over the years, and so everyone learns from that. But now we're going to talk about, relative to those lessons learned, and fast forward to what people do on megaprojects and should be doing. And I want to just give a little example that takes place in the United States. I'm sure that one that will be remembered by several people, and that is called a space shuttle that went up and exploded. And it is one of the examples that is used in engineering ethics courses now quite extensively to illustrate a point. This was not just a space shuttle going up. This was the first time that a non-astronaut was to be riding on the space shuttle. And not only was it a non-astronaut riding on the space shuttle, it was a teacher. It was a teacher that would be able to be there and sharing with the students all the excitement of space, doing experiments and seeing how great it was. And it was supposed to be a motivator to get kids interested in space exploration and to move our space program forward. It was a very cold day in Florida that day. Very unusual weather for the state of Florida in the United States. And one engineer came forward to the vice president of the company and said, "We can't send the space shuttle up today." Now remember, the entire world is watching. It's not just the United States. There are people everywhere watching this. This was going to be the most exciting day that people had seen in a long time. And so think about it. You're the vice president. You have the president of the United States who's actually sitting there watching, getting reports. You got all the NASA administrators watching, getting reports. And this engineer, tap, 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 "I'm sorry, but the space shuttle cannot go up today." You can only imagine the response. Why? Well, there's this little thing called an O-ring, which is about this big. And if it fails, it could be catastrophic. Well, how's catastrophic? What do you mean? Well, it could like explode. That would be a bad thing. And the vice president said, of the company, said, "Do you have any idea how many people are out there and the expectations of today? Can you give me 100% probability that this space shuttle is going to explode?" You never ask an engineer if there's 100% probability. So of course the answer was, no, we don't know, but there is a probability. And here's where the importance of what we don't appreciate in megaprojects is the importance of looking at risks and probability, but the outcome if that risk emerges. And so if the outcome is so catastrophic that no matter what had happened, that I don't care if it's 1%, if there's a 1% chance it happens, and it happens, if the outcome is so catastrophic when that happens, you maybe want to reconsider the decision to move forward. That is what we miss in megaprojects. And so I combine that now to Fukushima. Okay, it was a new technology. But we all learn, and we have to put ourselves into the real world, the current world of those lessons learned when we're even operating and maintaining megaprojects. And so the question becomes, even though TEPCO had its great social management system with the community, they completely involved the community. They were very, very involved. They knew the needs. They were very active. They were very giving to the community. There was a lot of interaction. There was a lot of friends and everything with TEPCO construction. But no one had actually analyzed risks going forward of, we know earthquakes happen in Japan, and they actually can be very extensive. Did anyone think a 9.0 could happen? Maybe not. Was there a probability? Absolutely. Did we ever think that it would be a convergence of being a very shallow earthquake, which would bring one of the largest tsunamis ever seen to the forefront when this nuclear power plant is basically sitting on the coast. Did anyone think it could happen? Probably not. Was there a 1% chance it could happen? Absolutely. And so the question becomes is you have to start thinking about these, on these very large projects where you're spending billions of dollars. The unique aspects of them is the risk of determining if these risks happen. It's not just about money. It's about lives, it's about reputation, it's about financial interest, it's about countries, it's about stakeholders. And so it's very, very, very important. It makes it very unique. So needless to say, as mega and gigaproject construction continue to boom in Asia, and management of these projects are going to continue to present challenges to all of us. We all know that proper infrastructure is the most essential element of economic development. And according to a study undertaken by Sunji Kusayanagi, who is a professor at the Kochi University of Technology, where I obtained my doctorate, he indicated that the amount of construction investment in Asia is more than $2 trillion a year. So again, I ask you, what makes managing these projects unique? Well, most has to do with the proper contextual or external risks that face these Asian projects. And while these external risks are inherent in any project around the world, there are unique aspects in Asia that make them more challenging. These external risks include political risks, economic risks, environmental risks, and social and cultural risks. And this is what makes them also some of the most controversial projects in the world. So political risk, of course, are those that involve issues or concerns associated with local, regional, national, political, and regulatory situations confronting the project and have often concerned themselves with issues of corruption. Political risks also are not often thought about when doing these mega projects on government changes and regime changes. And a real good example, another example, is there's this little company that used to exist called Enron in the United States that no longer exists. And they did a joint venture and consortium with another small little world company called Bechtel. And they went ahead and built a power plant in India. The government was all in favor of this. It was a great project. It was going to bring, again, great needs to the population, bring in that electricity, and so they went forward. No one actually really thought about the fact that another 4 or 5 years later there might be an election and there might be a different government entity that comes into power and a different party that comes into power, and there might be a chance that they weren't quite in favor of the same power plant. And not only did that happen, and not only did that government shut down the project, but they confiscated all of the equipment. Both companies lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the senior executives who were involved in those companies also lost their jobs. Environmental risks include those environmental projects, concerns, confronting the project both during the execution and the project operation, and raise controversy in regards to trade-off of economic prosperity and improving the quality of life, to obliterating towns and antiquities and the massive relocations of populations in order to undertake such projects, such as we saw with the Three Gorges Dam. Economic risks are risks that involve issues or concerns associated with macroeconomic effects of the project on the community and the region to which the project is located. Social and cultural risk factors associated with the social and cultural effects of the project in the community and the region within which is to be located and has potential objections from specific stakeholder groups. It is this latter contextual risks that, in my opinion and my experience, makes managing megaprojects in Asia especially unique to other parts of the world. While schedule, cost, quality goals are elements and crucial, cost and schedule, in managing projects, in Asia, there is a really critical need to understand and have the knowledge about dealing with people and organizational options in communities. As noted by Kusayanagi-san in his chapter in the book that I just talked about that we put together, He says that one can expect when one builds in areas that have supported cultures for thousands of years, there is a greater ratio of difficulties that will arise concerning the social effects of the project, making the proper execution of the project more difficult and costly. And to minimize the effects that develop from those kinds of problems, that the projects must be well planned in advance and include a process that is going to evaluate the risks related to the social effects of the project. And to accomplish that goal, project planners, and especially civil engineers, will implement megaprojects will have to have a deep knowledge of social science and regional cultural activities. And it's going to be necessary to consider the meaning of infrastructure systems when you are putting these projects together. So infrastructure, as we all know, is something that does enhance the public welfare and positive development of a community. And welfare includes satisfying the public requirements for physical, economic, cultural, and environmental benefits. And again, as Kasayanagi-san says in our book, society moves with general forces such as economic activities, political activities, cultural activities, and activities of living things. And so these activities are constantly interacting with each other in a system that we call a social supporting base. So what do I mean by that? One of the things that we do not do well in Western countries is consider the social management system around us. We don't go to the communities all the time and say, are you happy about this project? Is it going to meet your needs? Is it going to impact you visually? Is it going to have impacts in your transportation systems? Is it going to give you the ability to do something more than you did before? Is it going to detract from what you did before? We don't involve our communities enough, and when we build these projects, to determine whether the community even needs the project. We try to, as engineers and planners, to decide for people what they should need without necessarily knowing what they need. And so the social management system that consists in Asia and in a lot of the projects that I have been involved in is that there is an inherent nature to always involve the community in the planning process of projects. And this is something that we don't do well in the Western world. There are three different kinds of infrastructure that need to be considered in managing gigaprojects and megaprojects in Asia. One is the natural environment in which the project is being constructed. The soft infrastructure is the social management systems that I've just talked about with the community. And the third is the civil infrastructure, which is the physical building itself, which is going to be constructed. And so Kasayanagi-san's concept states that a society is supported by this supporting base and is supported by these three different kinds of infrastructure. And that when you build megaprojects in Asia, one has to understand that all three of those infrastructures should not be planned, built, and operated independently. They must be handled with the idea that they are all interconnected. Let's take an example right here. We have the new APB building right here at the University of Melbourne, which has, in addition to the civil infrastructure, it has the consideration of the natural environment around it, including the social systems such as educational systems that have to be considered, security systems that have to be considered, medical care systems that have to be considered. All of those become important when building this new building. And so the understanding of social management systems, in addition to the civil engineering and infrastructure development, is required for all future planning and the execution of megaprojects in Asia, especially in developing countries where you have indigenous people and local cultures that may not accept the new technologies that you are constructing. And I want to give you an example of local cultures not understanding or accepting new technologies. I worked on a project in the Philippines, in northern Luzon, and it was for a big US company that was putting into, called a multi-purpose project. They were taking waters from 2 rivers. They were going to provide irrigation to allow 2 rice crops to be done annually instead of 1. And the water would also then follow into a powerhouse to provide electricity to a region that did not have electricity. So the Philippine government was the owner. The developer was an American company that would also have a partial ownership in this. And they had a Korean contractor that was building it. And in northern Luzon, there's a little tiny indigenous culture called the Bugalots. And the Bugalot tribe used to be headhunters. Now, we don't think that they're headhunters anymore, but I guess no one really knows. But when they started building this project, they would build these access roads. They would work really hard during the day. They would go away. They'd come back from their camps in the morning, and the roads would be covered with massive, huge trees, blocking the roads. The equipment would be sabotaged, and they would have to fix and get all that moved, and these logs were huge, and so it was a massive process. And this continued for months with little progress being made. We were brought in as advisors to the project, and one of the questions that I asked the project manager, who, by the way, we have our own cultural differences in the United States as well. We don't have to be international to have cultural differences. We have the East Coast, we have the Southerners, and we have Texas. So the project manager was from Texas. And he would have his cowboy boots on, and he'd have his cowboy hat, and despite the OSHA regulations in the United States, you would have hard hats. You know, he was in his own environment where he did whatever he wanted to do, including and insult and offend everybody around him, including the Korean contractor. So that was one element. I mean, he offended them by, he would take clippers out and clip his nails in front of everybody in meetings, which completely annoyed everybody and offended and insulted the Koreans and their culture, but he just didn't get it because it was foreign to him. He didn't understand that. But it started creating this animosity, which did not help. Now we add the Bugalot tribes. And so I said, has anyone actually sat down with the chief of the tribes to ask him why they're doing this? No. It seemed like a common sense question to me, but no one had thought about it. So when they actually sat down with the chief of the tribes, you know what he said? He said, you know, all I really want is a small schoolhouse and a teacher. And I mean small schoolhouse, like a 2-room schoolhouse, to just teach our kids so that they will have a better quality of life than we will. That's all they wanted. In the scheme of a mega project that was billions of dollars, this was not a lot of money. They had probably already spent more money trying to resolve the issue than it cost to actually build the schoolhouse. And when they did, not only did it resolve the issues of no more sabotage and no more barricades going across the roads, but they actually started making lunches for the workers. And they started getting involved in the project. And they were like little kids jumping up and down. They were so excited. And so understanding the cultural differences is so critical to actually being able to manage projects where there's thousands of years of culture developed. So in addition to understanding the social systems of projects, mega projects in Asia, challenging and managing these billion-dollar projects, there has to be this understanding of cultural differences. So if we look at the examination from a Japanese perspective of how they design their projects differently and how they manage their project differently, I want to give you another example. So one of the difficulties that Japanese construction consulting engineers have on mega projects is recognizing and adjusting management to allow for those differences in cultural perspectives we just talked about, especially when Western companies are involved. And stated in another Japanese book written by 2 famous Japanese professors at the University of Tokyo, Kunishima and Soji, they have a book called The Principles of Construction Management. They look at construction management from the Japanese viewpoint, And they said it can be reasonably understood in 3 steps. The first step being the choice of fundamental technologies regarding the analytical techniques for analyzing productivity and efficiencies in terms of time and cost. The second is the choice of practical procedures in which they lay out rules for smoothly and safely directing the actual work to be done, such as design and construction, the organization and management techniques, which becomes a very important aspect for them. And the third is deciding how to judge the process of construction project implementation that's fair and just and contributes to the welfare and provides the client and investors with interest and benefits based on social systems, common sense, and ethics. So it is this concept of the cultural perspective of the Japanese of fair and just, which is prevalent in a lot of the Asian cultures, but which makes managing these projects very challenging and unique. So one of those most significant cultural differences, for example, residing in this different perspective between the Japanese contract management base of what they term to be mutual trust versus the common Western contract basis of mutual distrust is a major contributor to managing these multi-mega projects and with Westholder stakeholder participation. So what do I mean by mutual trust? Mutual trust assumes that regardless of what a contract might state, that the parties are ultimately going to resolve the issues fairly and justly once it's been completed. So mutual trust leads the Japanese consulting engineer to resist preparing written formal notices of claims that are beyond his or her control, regardless of what the contract documents may require. And the reason is because there's an assumption by the Japanese consulting engineer that the owner is fully aware of the issue anyway, they're fully aware of the effects, and in the end, they will be fair. They will adjust the contract and schedule accordingly, and they will be able to resolve the differences. And to submit a formal notice to the owner, to the Japanese consulting engineer, is seen as an insult because that would presume that the owner would not act fairly, honestly, and just. The Western nations, on the other hand, we have a much different view of contracts, a much different view, which flows from the perspective out of the contract as a document establishing in part protections for each of the parties from an unfair action by the other party. In short, the contract is a document that addresses and establishes the mistrust of one another. A Western nation uses a contract to the letter. And when I say to the letter, that means that if one party doesn't follow the rules laid out in the contract, the party not following the rules loses entitlement to recovery for the impacts. The contractor believes that it has suffered a cost or schedule impact for which they're not responsible. The Western owner will only recognize that impact if the contractor follows the rules as written in the contract, which means in most cases writing an immediate written notification of the effect and impact and submits it to the owner. So even if the owner is faced with evidence at the end of a project, if you have a Japanese contractor on board, that they did suffer impact, and they're fully aware of that at the end, the owner may, and often does, still reject the claim because the Japanese consulting engineer did not submit the formal timely notice as required within the contract documents. Now think about it. Both parties are acting on their cultural perspectives, and both believe they are firmly in their right. And so during megaprojects, where effects have project consequences seen well before the actual completion of the project, such cultural misunderstandings can have a devastating effect on the expectations linked to project goals and objectives. So the cost can be measured in hundreds of dollars and months, if not years, of delay. And in our example, understanding the cultural differences between the concepts of mutual trust and mutual distrust is critical to the success of a project. So So in project management and establishing its cost and schedule management and control processes and systems, it needs to be extremely sensitive to these cultural differences and how they might affect the effectiveness or efficiency of those processes and systems. In particular, and as stated in the example that we just talked about with the Japanese, project management needs to ensure that it has sensitized the control staff of the cultural differences and has established processes and systems that address the areas where such differences are likely to arise, including miscommunication, problem solving, and organizational cultures. So let's talk about miscommunications. It has several sources, including differences in body language, gestures, different meanings for the same word, different assumptions made for the same situation, and different languages itself contribute to the problem. And frequently, the language barriers seem to be ignored, creating confusion and often mistrust among the parties. For instance, just a little simple thing in doing business with the Japanese, where I've done a lot of business with the Japanese. When you have your business card and you ask for someone's business card and you take it as a Westerner, if you take the card and write on it, that's a complete insult. You have insulted the person by giving disrespect to the card. If you then take the card and put it in your pocket, that is also giving huge disrespect to the Japanese who value that business card, and you are to take the card, hold the card, address them, be respectful of them, and then place the card in a personal card holder that gives the due respect to that card and to the person. And if you do not do that, you will still probably see, yes, hi, big smiles, and they walk away going, no, never again to do business with that person. So different cultures tackle problems differently. And so thus, when managing megaprojects in Asia, the project management teams have to be cognizant of which approaches to use. The same is true with governments. They approach problems by different ways. Agencies are run differently, decisions are made differently, and so you have to understand that. So to overcome these cross-cultural differences, participatory stakeholders need to be aware of those differences from the onset of the project. Successful communication, I can't tell you how important it is. It includes clarification to every one of your team players, to explain to them that everything needs to be well understood, explained, going into details in order to attempt temptation of agreements based on general principles that exist in the long run, understand the rules of your contract, understand the cultural differences, understand everyone's needs, and at a minimum, provide the training with respect to doing business in Asia, as well as doing business from the people of that particular country. Selection of the right people with the right attitude towards an international and multi-assignment is going to be the priority of the executive team. Executives, senior management team should at least have one person originally from the location where the project is to be executed, and staff who have experience working with other cultures represented within a participatory stakeholders on the megaprojects. Thus, the unique aspects of managing megaprojects in Asia center on external risks, including the political risks, the economic risks, the environmental risks, and the cultural risks. And while all four play an extremely important role to the success and outcome of the megaproject, the cultural and social risk can seriously impact the project's success if not properly managed. That management recognition, both on the cultural differences among stakeholders, as well as the social management systems of the community and the understanding of the community's needs, will greatly, greatly contribute to the success of your projects. So once all those aspects of risk are identified, considered, and managed, we will finally begin to see our mega projects be successfully completed in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much for that. That was a fascinating discourse of someone who's been involved in projects personally, firsthand, across the world. What you reminded us, I think, of is that any project we do, especially gigaprojects, are societal choices, and they are not simply technical activities. They are activities which balance choice across society, and they're difficult to make, some of these choices. So you indicated to us some of the key elements of that, illustrating it with Asian projects. What was particularly fascinating, I think, is that we need to prepare in projects of these with the same capacity and awareness as we do in our own challenges locally. I think the distinction that you make with gigaprojects simply highlight the challenges of construction. The opportunities are many, but the obligations as professionals are to deliver safe, reliable, beneficial, and most importantly, ethical projects. So you illustrated that beautifully. I think by examining the projects in Asia, you contextualize risks magnificently. You acutely illustrated what those risks are locally. But too often, I think, we forget, in looking at such a distance, that the risks are local as well. And much of what you said has immediate application into the projects we have here at hand. I can think of many that are under current discussion in which the risks you raised are really very pertinent. So thank you very much for this contribution of the cultural perspective in construction, and to looking at projects large, extremely large, but in my mind also small. They may be distant, but they're also very local. So thank you very much for coming this evening. And I remind those in the audience, if you wish, there is a book in which much of this is addressed, and that can be accessed outside, I believe. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you very much. Thank you.